The massive ships appeared in Earth's orbit on a Tuesday morning. They were beautiful, shaped like giant birds with wings made of crystalline metal that caught the sunlight and turned it into rainbows. Each vessel stretched for miles, covered in intricate patterns that looked more like artwork than military design. The people of Earth stopped what they were doing and looked up at the sky in wonder and fear. Inside the largest ship, High Scholar Kriath adjusted his ceremonial robes and checked his reflection one last time. His feathers were perfectly arranged, each one displaying the complex patterns that marked his rank in the Valtheran diplomatic corps. He had made first contact with 17 species in his career, and each time had gone exactly according to protocol. This would be no different. The humans called themselves representatives of something called the United Nations. Kriath found the name amusing. United? His intelligence reports showed these creatures had been fighting wars among themselves until very recently. They had barely achieved faster-than-light travel, stumbling into it through what appeared to be blind luck and stubborn determination, rather than elegant scientific development. The first meeting took place on a space station the humans had built in orbit. Kriath walked into the conference room with his diplomatic team, his head held high. The humans stood waiting, dressed in simple black suits that looked painfully plain compared to Valtharan finery. Their faces were difficult to read, lacking the expressive feathers or color-changing skin that most civilized species possessed. "Welcome to Earth," said the lead human, a woman who introduced herself as Secretary General Maria Santos. "We are honored to meet representatives of the Galactic Council." Kriath waved a wing dismissively. Yes, the honor is certainly yours. Let us proceed with the standard protocols. You will submit samples of your technology for evaluation, provide a complete census of your population and resources, and prepare to accept council oversight during your integration period. The humans looked at each other. Secretary General Santos spoke carefully. "We were hoping this would be more of a mutual exchange. We have much to learn from you, but we also have knowledge and resources to share." Kriath made a sound that his translator converted to laughter. "Share, my dear primitive creatures, you have nothing we need. Your technology is centuries behind ours. Your culture is violent and chaotic. The Council will guide you toward civilization. But first you must understand your place in the galactic order." One of the human delegates, a military officer with gray hair and hard eyes, leaned forward. "And what place is that exactly?" "As junior members, of course," Kriath said, as if explaining something obvious to a child. "You will provide raw materials that your planet possesses in abundance. The Council will provide protection and guidance. It is a fair arrangement that has worked for thousands of years." Secretary General Santos kept her voice level. "That sounds less like membership and more like vassalage." Kriath's feathers ruffled with irritation. "Call it what you wish. The alternative is to remain outside the Council's protection. And I assure you the galaxy can be very dangerous for species who refuse to cooperate." The meeting went downhill from there. Kriath made the humans tour the Valtheran flagship, pointing out its magnificence and making sure they understood the vast technological gap between their species. He showed them weapons that could melt asteroids and shields that could withstand the heat of a star. He spoke of the covenant of civilized worlds, where disputes were settled through economic pressure and diplomatic maneuvering, not crude violence. "War is a thing of the past," he explained as they walked through a museum section of the ship. "The last true conflict in galactic space occurred over 10,000 years ago. Since then, civilized species have found better ways to resolve differences." The gray-haired military officer, who had introduced himself as General James Cooper, studied a display showing ancient battle armor. 10,000 years, he said quietly. "That's a long piece, indeed," Kriath said proudly. "Something your species has never achieved." General Cooper turned to look at him. "No, we haven't. We probably never will." Kriath took this as an admission of human inferiority and felt satisfied. The humans were beginning to understand. When the diplomatic mission returned to Earth, Kriath broadcast his report across standard galactic channels. It was customary to share first contact experiences with other Council species. He described the humans as charmingly primitive and their military museums as adorable attempts to seem dangerous. He showed footage of ancient human weapons, swords, cannons, early aircraft, and the galactic audience found them quaint and amusing. "They actually fought each other with nuclear weapons," Kriath said with barely concealed amusement. "On their own planet. Can you imagine such barbarism?" The broadcast was picked up by Earth's monitoring stations. Within hours, it had been translated and spread across every human network. The people of Earth watched as this alien diplomat mocked their history, their sacrifices, and their struggles. They watched him laugh at the weapons that had killed millions and the wars that had shaped their civilization. Secretary General Santos called an emergency session. Representatives from every nation on Earth gathered to discuss their response. The debate was fierce. Some wanted to accept the Council's terms, arguing that humanity couldn't afford to make enemies so soon after reaching the stars. Others wanted to tell the Valtharans exactly where they could put their covenant of civilized worlds. General Cooper stood and asked for silence. "The question isn't whether we can defeat them," he said. "The question is whether we're willing to fight for our independence. Because make no mistake, if we submit now, we'll be submitting forever. The Council sees us as primitives, as resources to be exploited. That won't change unless we make it change." The vote was close, but in the end, Earth decided to refuse the Council's terms. Secretary General Santos delivered the message personally to Kriath. "Earth will join the galactic community as equals or not at all. We will not accept vassalage disguised as membership." Kriath's feathers puffed up in outrage. "You dare refuse the Council? You are one planet, one species. We are thousands of worlds, billions of citizens, technology that spans millennia. You will submit, or you will face corrective measures." "Then I guess we'll face corrective measures," Santos said calmly. "This meeting is over." Kriath returned to his ship in a fury. He immediately contacted the Council and requested authorization to deploy the enforcement fleet. This had only been necessary a handful of times in the last 1,000 years, always against primitive species who didn't understand the futility of resistance. The Council granted his request within hours. 3 days later, 50 Valtharan enforcement vessels took position near Earth's moon. They were even more impressive than the diplomatic ships, covered in weapons that had never been fired in anger, only in demonstrations. Kriath broadcast a final ultimatum to Earth. "You have 24 hours to accept Council authority. If you refuse, we will disable your orbital infrastructure and occupy your major cities until your leaders see reason." This is not a war. This is simply the natural order asserting itself. On Earth, every military base went to high alert. Generals and admirals who had spent their careers preparing for conflicts between human nations suddenly faced a very different enemy. Admiral Keiko Zhang, commander of Earth's defense fleet, looked at the tactical displays showing the massive Valtharan ships and allowed herself a cold smile. "They think this is going to be easy," she said to her staff. "They think we'll panic and surrender. They've forgotten what we are." "What are we, Admiral?" asked a young officer. Zhang looked at him. "We're the species that turned rocks into nuclear weapons. We're the species that weaponized orbit before we reached it. We're the species that spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of killing each other." She turned back to the displays. "Let's show them what happens when you threaten someone who actually remembers how to fight." The 24 hours ticked down. The galaxy watched and waited for Earth's inevitable surrender. They had no idea what was about to happen. The Valtharan enforcement fleet hung in space near Luna like jeweled ornaments against the black. Each ship blazed with running lights, their hulls polished to mirror brightness. They had arranged themselves in a perfect ceremonial formation, one that had been used for intimidation purposes for over 3,000 years. It had never failed to achieve the desired effect. High Scholar Kriath stood on his flagship's observation deck, watching Earth through the massive viewport. The little blue planet looked so fragile, so insignificant. He couldn't understand why these humans were being so stubborn. Didn't they realize how outmatched they were? His ships were each the size of a small city, equipped with energy shields that could withstand stellar radiation and weapons that could crack a moon in half. Well, not literally crack a moon. The weapons had never actually been used for that purpose. But the simulations showed they could do it, and that's what mattered. "Status report," Kriath commanded. His tactical officer, a younger Valtharan named Seath, checked his displays. "All ships in position, High Scholar. Shields at maximum. Weapons charged and ready. We are detecting increased activity from human orbital installations, but nothing that poses a threat." "Good. Begin the demonstration. Target one of their satellites. Something expensive looking, but not essential. Let's show them what they're dealing with." The flagship's main weapon powered up with a sound like singing crystal. A beam of concentrated energy lanced out across the void, striking a human communication satellite. The satellite exploded in a brief flash of light and debris. Kriath waited for the response. Surely now the humans would realize their position and surrender. The communication channels remained silent for nearly 10 minutes. Then a simple message came through. Valtharan Fleet, this is Earth Defense Command. You have fired upon our property. This constitutes an act of war. You have one opportunity to withdraw. If you fire again, we will respond with lethal force. Kriath's feathers ruffled with amusement. Lethal force? From these primitives? He gave the order to target another satellite, a larger one this time. But before his weapons officer could fire, Seath shouted a warning. High Scholar, detecting multiple launches from Earth's surface and orbital platforms. Tracking. By the ancestors, there are hundreds of them. Hundreds of what? Kriath demanded. Unknown projectiles. Moving fast, extremely fast. Impact in 30 seconds. Shields will hold, Kriath said confidently. Nothing they have can penetrate Valtharan defensive technology. He was partially correct. The first wave of missiles that struck his fleet were nuclear-tipped, and the shields did stop them. The explosions bloomed like flowers against invisible barriers, spectacular and ultimately harmless. Kriath felt vindicated. Then the second wave arrived. They weren't missiles. They were solid slugs of tungsten carbide alloy, accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed by electromagnetic launchers. The humans called them railguns, though they were really mass drivers. Simple, ancient technology that humanity had refined for one purpose: punching holes through things. The shields, designed to disperse energy, did almost nothing against solid matter moving at relativistic speeds. The first slug hit the Valtharan destroyer Pride of Dawn amidships. The kinetic energy was so enormous that it didn't just penetrate the hull, it vaporized everything it touched. The ship literally came apart, breaking into 3 large pieces and thousands of smaller ones. Kriath watched in horror as 5 more ships suffered the same fate in the span of seconds. The beautiful formation dissolved into chaos as Valtharan captains who had never fought a real battle tried to remember emergency procedures from training exercises they'd done decades ago. Return fire, Kriath screamed. Destroy their launch platforms. The Valtharan fleet began firing, their energy weapons reaching out toward Earth's orbital installations. They scored several hits, destroying 3 human military stations. But for every target they destroyed, 10 more appeared. The humans had hidden weapons platforms among their civilian satellites. In dead satellites they'd pretended to abandon, even on the dark side of their moon. And then the human ships arrived. They came from behind Luna, where they'd been hiding in the gravity shadow. Dozens of angular, ugly vessels that looked nothing like proper starships. They were covered in gun turrets, missile pods, and armor plating. They had names painted on their hulls in human languages: Yamato, Bismarck, Enterprise, Akula. Hudat Admiral Jang commanded from the bridge of the UES Resolution, a heavy cruiser that had been built in secret over the past 5 years. She watched the tactical display with cold satisfaction as her fleet emerged from concealment. All ships weapons free, she ordered. Target the ships that look the most expensive. Let's hurt their pride along with their fleet. The human fleet attacked like a pack of wolves, moving in coordinated groups, covering each other's approaches. They used tactics the Valtharans had never seen: feints, flanking maneuvers, concentration of force. They launched swarms of autonomous drones that the Valtharan point defense systems couldn't track, because the Valtharans didn't really have point defense systems. Why would they? Everyone used energy weapons that moved at the speed of light, not physical projectiles. The destroyer Morning Light tried to turn its main weapon on a human cruiser, only to be swarmed by 50 combat drones. Each drone was barely larger than a human, carrying a shaped explosive charge designed for one purpose: to get close and detonate. They moved erratically, dodging and weaving, impossible to target with weapons designed for ship-to-ship combat. 37 of them were destroyed before they reached their target. 13 got through. The Morning Light didn't explode dramatically. The drones punched through its hull in precise locations, destroying shield generators, weapon nodes, and maneuvering thrusters. Within minutes, the destroyer was dead in space, venting atmosphere and debris. Kriath's flagship shuddered as human railgun rounds hammered against its shields. The shields held, but barely. Damage reports flooded in from across the fleet. Ships were disabled, destroyed, or fleeing. His beautiful enforcement fleet, which had never lost a single vessel in 300 years of service, was being torn apart. "How are they doing this?" Seath asked, his voice shaking. "Our technology is superior. Our ships are larger. We should be winning." Admiral Zhang could have answered that question. From her command chair, she watched the battle unfold and knew exactly why the humans were winning. The Valthorans had built their ships to intimidate and suppress, not to fight. They had shields but minimal armor. They had powerful weapons but no point defense. They had size but sacrificed maneuverability. Their crews had trained for ceremonial formations, not combat operations. Humanity had spent its entire existence at war. Every human weapon system had been tested in actual combat, refined through brutal experience, improved by the survivors of previous battles. Human ships had redundant systems because they expected to be damaged. Human tactics assumed casualties because they'd learned through millennia of warfare that victory required sacrifice. The Resolution took a direct hit from a Valthoran energy weapon, the beam punching through the forward armor and destroying 2 decks. 40 crew members died instantly. Zhang didn't even flinch. She rerouted power, sealed the damaged sections, and kept fighting. That kind of damage would have forced a Valthoran ship to retreat. For a human warship, it was just another day at the office. After 4 hours of battle, Kriath gave the order to withdraw. Of the 50 ships he'd brought to intimidate Earth into submission, 19 had been destroyed completely. 23 more were damaged too severely to continue fighting. Only 8 ships remained combat capable, and those were fleeing as fast as their FTL drives could carry them. The human fleet had lost 11 ships with dozens more damaged. But they weren't retreating. They were already beginning recovery operations, pulling survivors from wrecked vessels, salvaging useful materials from destroyed ships, both human and Valthoran. As his flagship jumped to FTL, racing back toward Council space, Kriath stared at the tactical display in disbelief. This wasn't supposed to happen. Primitive species didn't defeat Council forces. They didn't have tactics, strategy, or the will to accept casualties. They weren't supposed to be good at war, but humans were. They were very, very good at it. Across the galaxy, billions of beings watched the footage of the battle. They watched the beautiful Valtharan ships being torn apart by ugly human weapons. They watched crews who had forgotten how to fight facing crews who had never stopped learning. They watched 10,000 years of peace shatter against a few centuries of barely restrained violence. The galaxy had forgotten what war looked like. Humanity had just given them a reminder. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened within hours of the Battle of Luna. Representatives from 200 species filled the great chamber, their voices creating a cacophony of alarm and disbelief. The central holographic display showed footage of the battle, playing on repeat. Valtharan ships breaking apart, human vessels moving with predatory efficiency, the debris field that now orbited Earth's moon. Council Speaker Than, an elderly crystallid whose body glowed with stress patterns, called for order. His species had led the Council for 3,000 years, guiding galactic civilization through disputes and disagreements with patience and wisdom. But he had never seen anything like this. "The Valtharan delegation has the floor," Than announced, his translated voice heavy with concern. High Scholar Kriath stepped forward, his feathers disheveled and his ceremonial robe stained. He looked like he hadn't slept since fleeing Earth's space. "Honored Council members, I come before you with a warning. The human species is a threat to galactic peace. They possess military capabilities far beyond what any new species should have. They attack without provocation, without mercy, without honor. They must be stopped before they spread their violence to other systems." A representative from the Dulari Collective, a species of aquatic beings, spoke up. "Without provocation? Scholar Kriath, we have reviewed the communication logs. You issued an ultimatum and fired first. By any measure, you initiated hostilities." Kriath's feathers puffed indignantly. "I was conducting a standard enforcement action. These primitives refused to accept Council authority. What was I supposed to do, simply accept their insolence?" "You were supposed to negotiate," said Ambassador Roth of the Mindari Union, a mammalian species known for their diplomatic skills. "You were supposed to find common ground. Instead, you demanded submission and were surprised when they refused." The chamber erupted in argument. Some species supported Kriath's position, arguing that humanity's military strength made them dangerous and unpredictable. Others pointed out that the Council had effectively declared war on Earth by sending an enforcement fleet. Still others wondered, with growing unease, what it meant that a single planet had defeated a force that was supposed to be invincible. While the Council argued, humanity was busy learning. Every piece of Valtheran wreckage was being studied, analyzed, and reverse-engineered. Human scientists worked around the clock, examining the alien technology with a mixture of fascination and tactical assessment. Dr. Sarah Chen led the research team examining a mostly intact Valtheran destroyer that had been captured during the battle. She stood in what had been the ship's engine room, running her hands over conduits that pulsed with exotic energy. "This is incredible," she said to her colleague, Dr. Marcus Webb. "Their FTL technology is centuries ahead of ours. But look at this, no redundancy. If you disable this coupling here, the entire drive system shuts down. It's elegant, efficient, and completely impractical for military use." Webb was examining the ship's weapons systems. Same story here. "These energy weapons are powerful, but they have no fallback systems, and I can't find anything resembling point defense. It's like they designed these ships never expecting to be shot at." "Because they probably didn't," Chen said. "Look at the construction. This hull is beautiful, artistic even. But the armor is minimal. They prioritized appearance over protection. The implications were staggering. The galaxy's technology was advanced in many ways, but their military science had atrophied. 10,000 years of peace had turned the Galactic Council's forces into a paper tiger, impressive to look at, but fragile when tested." General Cooper stood in the Situation Room beneath the Pentagon, reviewing intelligence reports from across known space. What he was reading both relieved and terrified him. "They're not ready for war," he said to Admiral Zhang, who had joined the meeting via video link from her ship. "Not any of them. The Council hasn't fought a real conflict in millennia. Their weapons are outdated. Their tactics are non-existent. Their crews have no combat experience. So we can beat them," Zhang said. "Maybe," Cooper replied, "but that's not what worries me. What worries me is what happens when the rest of the galaxy realizes the same thing we just did." He brought up a star map showing Council space. There are thousands of species in the Council. Thousands of old grudges, territorial disputes, and political rivalries that have been kept frozen by Council authority. If that authority collapses, if everyone realizes the Council's military is just for show, then the galaxy might tear itself apart. Zhang was quiet for a moment. "So what do? We prepare for the worst and hope for the best," Cooper said. "Expand production. Build more ships. Train more crews. Because I don't think the Council is going to let this go. They can't afford to. If they back down from one primitive species, their entire system of control collapses." He was right. Within a week, the Galactic Council announced the formation of a peacekeeping armada. 5 species contributed ships: the Valtherans, the Karathi, the Mendari, the Thule Kingdoms, and the Crystallid Hegemony. Together, they assembled a force of over 500 vessels, the largest military fleet gathered in 3,000 years. The official announcement spoke of restoring order and protecting galactic peace. The subtext was clear: humanity would be made an example of. Other species needed to see that challenging the Council was futile, but while the armada was being assembled, something else was happening. Minor species throughout the galaxy were watching humanity's example with great interest. The Talak Confederation, which had chafed under Council resource quotas for centuries, quietly began militarizing their merchant fleet. The Vren clusters, whose territorial claims had been ignored by the Council for generations, started modernizing their defense forces. The galaxy was waking up from a very long sleep, and it was starting to remember that power came from the ability to defend yourself, not from the permission of those who claimed authority. The peacekeeping armada gathered at the edge of Council space, preparing for the journey to Earth. Their commander was High Admiral Korath, a veteran Karathi officer who was considered the finest military mind in the galaxy. He studied the reports from the Battle of Luna with growing concern. His second-in-command, Captain Vess of the Mendari, found him in his ready room, staring at tactical displays. "You're worried," Vess said. "It wasn't a question." "I'm terrified," Korath replied. "Look at these human tactics. They use their ships like weapons, not like homes. They accept casualties that would be unthinkable to us. They have automated weapon systems that can operate independently. Every single thing about how they fight is designed to kill efficiently. But we outnumber them," Vess pointed out. 500 ships against what intelligence suggests is fewer than 100 human warships. Korath pulled up footage of a human destroyer during the Battle of Luna. The ship was on fire, venting atmosphere clearly dying, but it kept fighting, kept firing until a Valtharan energy beam finally cut it in half. "Look at this," Korath said. The crew stayed at their posts until the end. No evacuation, no surrender. They just kept fighting until they couldn't anymore. When was the last time you saw that kind of dedication? That kind of acceptance of death? Vess had no answer. "They scare me," Korath admitted. "Not because they're more advanced than us, because they're more committed. They've spent their entire history preparing for this moment, and we've spent ours trying to forget it." The peacekeeping armada departed for Earth 3 days later. They traveled in perfect formation, maintaining communication protocols, following every regulation in the Council military handbook. They looked magnificent, powerful, and unstoppable. On Earth, Admiral Zhang watched their approach on long-range sensors. The human fleet was outnumbered 5-1. Many of her ships were still damaged from the previous battle. Reinforcements were being built as fast as possible, but they wouldn't be ready in time. "All ships, this is Admiral Zhang," she broadcast to the fleet. "I won't lie to you. We're outnumbered and outgunned. But we have something they don't. We know how to fight. We've been doing it since we climbed out of the caves. Every tactic, every strategy, every lesson we've learned through blood and sacrifice. This is what we've been preparing for." She paused, looking at the faces of her crew on the bridge. Young and old from every nation on Earth, united by a common purpose. "The galaxy thinks we're primitives. Let's show them what primitives can do. All ships, prepare for engagement. And remember, we're not fighting for glory or honor or any of that nonsense. We're fighting so that humanity stays free. That's all that matters." The fleet acknowledged her orders and moved into position. The asteroid belt of their solar system was about to become a battlefield. The asteroid belt had never been a particularly interesting place. Rocks and ice tumbling through space. Too small to be planets, too numerous to be worth individual attention. But for the Battle of the Outer Rim, as it would later be called, it became the most important battlefield in the galaxy. High Admiral Korath brought his peacekeeping armada into the belt cautiously. His ships maintained tight formation, shields overlapping for maximum protection. They advanced slowly, scanning for human vessels. The fleet looked like a wall of light moving through the darkness, 500 ships representing the combined might of galactic civilization. Admiral Zhang watched them come. Her fleet of 97 ships was scattered throughout the belt, hidden among the asteroids. They had powered down all non-essential systems, running silent, waiting. The human vessels looked like just more rocks drifting in the void. "They're keeping formation," Zhang observed from the bridge of the Resolution. "They're following doctrine. That's good for us." Her tactical officer, Commander Park, raised an eyebrow. "How is that good?" "They could coordinate their fire, maximize their shield coverage." "They could also be predictable," Zhang replied, "and rigid. In combat, flexibility beats coordination every time." She waited until the armada was deep into the belt, surrounded by asteroids on all sides. Then she gave the order. "All ships, light them up." Across the belt, human ships powered up simultaneously. Engines flared to life. Weapon systems came online. Targeting sensors began painting the armada vessels with electromagnetic radiation. And most importantly, the humans activated every piece of electronic warfare equipment they had. The armada's sensor displays went haywire. Suddenly there weren't 97 human ships, there were thousands of them. Ghost images filled the displays, multiplying and moving in erratic patterns. The humans were using every trick they'd developed over centuries of electronic warfare. Decoys, jammers, false signatures, and sensor ghosts. Korath felt his stomach drop. "All ships, defensive posture. Do not break formation." But it was too late for that. The human attack came from every direction at once. Railgun rounds fired from concealment, using asteroids as cover. Missiles with nuclear warheads launched on ballistic trajectories, hiding their approach behind debris. And worst of all, small human ships barely larger than fighters darted between the asteroids at speeds that made Korath's pilots dizzy just watching. The Mindari cruiser, Harmony's Dawn, took 3 railgun hits in rapid succession. Its shields, designed to stop energy weapons, did nothing against solid projectiles. The ship's elegant hull crumpled like paper. Escape pods began launching immediately. The Mindari had always been cautious about preserving life. That caution made them vulnerable. Human targeting systems identified the escape pods and classified them as non-threats, removing them from targeting priorities. But the Mandari ship, crippled and dying, was still broadcasting its surrender. In galactic warfare, that meant the fight was over. The victor would disable the ship and take prisoners. But humanity fought by different rules. A damaged enemy ship was still a threat until it was completely destroyed. The resolution put 2 more rounds into Harmony's Dawn, ensuring it would never fight again. Captain Vess, watching from the flagship, felt sick. They're destroying surrendering vessels. That's a war crime. Korath shook his head, his expression grim. No, they're making sure threats stay neutralized. They're not shooting the escape pods, they're following rules of engagement, just not ours. This is what real war looks like, Vess. I tried to warn the Council. The battle descended into chaos. The Armada's tight formation, which should have been their strength, became a liability. Ships couldn't maneuver without risking collision with their neighbors. Their overlapping shields created interference patterns. Their coordinated firing solutions assumed enemies would stay still, not dart between asteroids like minnows fleeing sharks. Human tactics were brutally simple: hit and run. A human destroyer would emerge from behind an asteroid, fire every weapon it had, then immediately dive back into cover. By the time the Armada ships oriented their weapons, the destroyer was gone and another ship was attacking from a different angle. The Thule Kingdom's contribution to the Armada, a squadron of 12 ceremonial warships, attempted to pursue a human cruiser through a dense cluster of asteroids. The Thule ships were beautiful, covered in gold plating and flying banners that streamed behind them in the solar wind. They were also completely unprepared for asteroid navigation at high speed. The human cruiser, the UES Defiant, threaded through the asteroids with precision born from years of belt mining operations. The Thule ships tried to follow. 3 of them clipped asteroids and suffered hull breaches. 2 more collided with each other when their formation got too tight. The remaining 7 gave up the pursuit and limped back to the main fleet. Admiral Zhang rotated her forces constantly, never letting any ship stay in combat longer than necessary. When a vessel took damage, it fell back for repairs while fresh ships moved up. She used the asteroids not just for cover but as weapons, calculating trajectories and using precise shots to send rocks tumbling toward enemy vessels. A 10-ton asteroid, accelerated by a well-placed missile, hit the Valtharan ship Celestial Grace like a hammer. The impact drove the ship into another asteroid, which triggered a cascade of collisions. Within minutes, 3 Valtharan vessels were disabled, drifting helplessly through the belt. On the flagship, Korath watched his tactical display with growing despair. He was losing ships faster than he could count them. His fleet had the numbers, the technology, the firepower, but none of it mattered. The humans were fighting with terrain, with mobility, with tactics that his crews couldn't counter because they'd never been trained for this kind of combat. "High Admiral, we need to withdraw," Captain Vess urged. "We're losing too many ships." "If we withdraw, the Council falls," Korath replied. "Every minor species will see that we can be defeated. Every territorial dispute we've mediated will reignite. The peace we've maintained for 10,000 years will shatter." "It's already shattering," Vess said quietly. "Look at what we're doing. We're fighting a war, real war, not the ceremonial conflicts in our history books. And we're losing." Korath knew she was right, but he couldn't give the order to retreat. Not yet. He had to achieve something, some kind of victory he could show the Council. He looked at his tactical display, analyzing the human movements, trying to find a pattern. There. The humans were rotating ships through a repair zone, a relatively clear area of space behind a large asteroid cluster. If he could hit that zone, he could destroy damaged human vessels before they could return to combat. It wasn't honorable, but honor was a luxury his fleet could no longer afford. "All ships concentrate fire on these coordinates," he ordered, highlighting the repair zone. "Maximum power. I want overwhelming firepower on that position." The Armada's ships oriented toward the target zone, charging their weapons. 300 vessels preparing to fire simultaneously. Enough energy to vaporize a small moon. Korath felt a grim satisfaction. The humans would learn that superior numbers still counted for something. Then his sensor officer screamed a warning. The asteroid cluster near the repair zone wasn't all natural. The humans had hidden mines throughout it. Hundreds of fusion warheads camouflaged as rocks positioned precisely for this moment. Zhang had anticipated that the Armada would eventually target her repair zone. She'd turned it into a trap, The mines detonated simultaneously, creating a chain reaction that tore through the asteroid cluster. Rock fragments accelerated to enormous speeds, turned into projectiles by the explosions. The fragments slammed into the Armada ships that had been carefully positioning themselves for the killing blow. The crystallid battleship, Eternal Wisdom, lost its entire forward section. The Karathi heavy cruiser, Pride of Korath, was cut in half. Ships that had stood for centuries, that had sailed the stars in peace, were destroyed in seconds by simple explosives and chunks of rock. Korath stared at the carnage in disbelief. The humans had turned his own tactic against him. They'd made him want to attack the repair zone, had positioned their ships to look vulnerable, then destroyed his fleet when he took the bait. All ships, full retreat, he ordered, his voice hollow. Exit the belt, regroup in open space. But the Armada had advanced too deep into the belt. There was no quick exit, no clear path. And the human ships, which had been designed for asteroid belt operations from the beginning, pursued them every kilometer of the way. By the time what remained of the peacekeeping Armada emerged from the asteroid belt, they had lost over 200 ships. The humans had lost 36. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the supposedly inferior species handed galactic civilization its worst military defeat in recorded history. The retreat of the peacekeeping Armada marked the beginning of the end for the Galactic Council, as it had existed for 10,000 years. High Admiral Korath's remaining ships limped back to Council space, their hulls scarred, their crews traumatized, their confidence shattered. They had gone to Earth expecting an easy victory and returned broken. The news spread across the galaxy faster than light. On hundreds of worlds, species that had accepted Council authority for millennia suddenly began asking uncomfortable questions. If humanity could defy the Council, why couldn't they? If the peacekeeping Armada could be defeated, what exactly was the Council's authority based on? The Talic Confederation was the first to break away. They announced they would no longer accept Council trade restrictions and backed up their declaration with a newly militarized fleet. The Vren clusters followed, reclaiming territory they insisted had been stolen centuries ago. Within months, border disputes that had been frozen for generations became shooting wars, but the Council wasn't ready to surrender. Council Speaker Than called one final emergency session. The chamber was half empty. Many species had stopped sending representatives, no longer seeing the point. But the core members remained. The Valtharans, the Karathi, the Crystallids, and a dozen others who had the most to lose if the old order collapsed. We must face reality, Than said, his crystalline body flickering with stress. We cannot defeat the humans militarily. We have tried twice, and twice we have failed. It is time to negotiate. High Scholar Kriath, looking older and more ragged than anyone had ever seen him, stood to object. Negotiate? With primitives? If we show weakness now, we lose everything. We've already lost everything, said Ambassador Roth of the Mendari. The galaxy is fracturing. Species are arming themselves. We're on the brink of chaos not because of humanity, but because we relied on a military force that existed only for show. We built a peace on the illusion of strength, and humanity exposed that illusion. Then what do you propose? Kriath demanded. We send someone to Earth to talk, Roth said. Really talk. Not to demand submission, but to find common ground. And we send someone the humans might actually listen to. That someone was Mediator Willis of the Theraxian Collective. She was young for a diplomat, barely 200 years old, but she had a reputation for honesty and practical thinking. More importantly, she had publicly opposed both military actions against Earth, which gave her credibility the humans might respect. Yellis arrived at Earth on a small diplomatic shuttle, alone except for a pilot. She sent a simple message ahead. I would like to speak with whoever is willing to listen. I'm not here to threaten or demand. I'm here to understand. Secretary General Santos met her at the same space station where Kriath had made his disastrous first contact. But this time the atmosphere was different. Santos brought Admiral Jang and General Cooper with her, but also scientists, cultural representatives, and historians. Yellis was nothing like Kriath. She was small, soft-spoken, and when she looked at the humans, she seemed genuinely curious rather than condescending. She spent the first day just asking questions. What was human history like? How did they see themselves? What did they want from the galaxy? On the second day, Santos took Yellis on a tour of Earth. They visited museums dedicated to human wars, The world wars, the nuclear standoffs, the countless smaller conflicts. Illis saw exhibits showing weapons humanity had built, battles they had fought, and most importantly, the peace they had struggled to create. "This is what disturbs me most," Illis said, standing in front of a display showing nuclear weapons. "Not that you developed these, but that you used them. On your own species. On your own planet. Twice," Admiral Jang said quietly. She had joined them for the tour. "We used nuclear weapons twice in anger, and we've regretted it ever since. But that's the point, Mediator Willis. We know what we're capable of. We've seen what happens when violence becomes the only answer. That's why we fight so hard to stay free, because we know what slavery looks like, what tyranny feels like. We've experienced it ourselves." Illis turned to look at her. "The Council thinks you're barbarians. Violent, primitive, dangerous. We are dangerous," Zhang agreed. "But not because we want to be. Because we had to be. Earth isn't a gentle world. We have predators, diseases, natural disasters. We had to fight for every inch of survival, and then we had to fight each other for thousands of years before we finally learned to work together. We're not proud of our history, Mediator, but we're not ashamed of it either. It made us who we are." On the third day, Illis met with General Cooper in the Pentagon Situation Room. He showed her Earth's military capabilities without hiding anything. The factories producing warships, the training facilities turning civilians into soldiers, the research labs developing new weapons. "This terrifies the Council," Illis said, looking at production figures that showed Earth could build a fleet larger than the entire peacekeeping armada in less than 2 years. "It should," Cooper replied. "But here's what the Council needs to understand. We don't want to conquer the galaxy. We don't want an empire. We just want to be left alone to live our lives, make our own decisions, and find our place among the stars. Everything you see here, all these weapons, all this military power, it exists for one reason, so that no one can force us to submit. Not the Council, not the Baltharans, not anyone." He pulled up a historical document on the display, something called the Declaration of Independence. "We have a tradition on Earth. It says that people have the right to govern themselves, to make their own choices, to be free. We fought wars to establish that right. We've died for it. And we're not going to give it up just because some ancient empire thinks we should." Illis read the document, her translator rendering it into her language. When she finished, she was quiet for a long time. "You would fight the entire galaxy for this," she said finally. "It wasn't a question. If we had to," Cooper confirmed. "But we'd rather not. We'd rather trade, share knowledge, explore together. We'd rather be friends. But if the only choice is friendship or slavery, we'll choose to stand alone." Illis returned to Council space after a week on Earth. She presented her findings to what remained of the Council in a session that lasted for hours. She showed them footage from Earth's museums, quoted human philosophers and leaders, explained the history that had shaped humanity's character. "They are not barbarians," she concluded. "They are survivors. Every species in the galaxy has had the luxury of developing civilization in relative peace. Humanity didn't have that luxury. They had to fight for everything, and it showed them that freedom is precious because it can be lost. They will never surrender that freedom willingly, and we cannot take it by force. The only path forward is to accept them as equals." The Council debated for weeks. Some species refused to accept the new reality, but slowly, gradually, a consensus emerged. The galaxy was changing whether they liked it or not. Better to adapt than to be swept away. The formal peace treaty was signed 6 months after the Battle of the Outer Rim. It recognized Earth as a sovereign power with full rights and protections. The Council itself was restructured, becoming less of a governing body and more of a forum for discussion. No species could be forced to accept Council authority anymore. Membership was voluntary, and decisions required genuine consensus. 10 years later, Ambassador Illis returned to Earth for a diplomatic conference. She found a world that had continued to grow, to explore, to reach out to other species. Human ships traveled the galaxy, trading, learning, occasionally fighting when threatened, but mostly just living. She met Admiral Jang at a reception in Geneva. Zhang had retired from active service but still consulted for Earth defense. She looked older but content. "I have a question I've wanted to ask for years," Illis said. "Now that you've achieved what you fought for, freedom, recognition, security, will you ever truly put down your weapons?" Zhang looked out the window at the night sky, where satellites and defense platforms orbited silently. The galaxy keeps asking us that. They want to know when we'll become peaceful like them. And what do you tell them? I tell them we are peaceful, Zhang said. But peace isn't the absence of weapons. It's the choice not to use them unless we have to. The galaxy spent 10,000 years forgetting how to fight, and they nearly tore themselves apart when they remembered. We never forgot. And because we remember what violence costs, we're careful with it. She turned to face Eyeless directly. Our ships will always be armed. Our soldiers will always be trained. Our weapons will always be maintained. Not because we want to use them, but because we want the choice. The galaxy learned an important lesson through us. Peace is something you build and defend. It's not handed to you. It's not guaranteed. It's a choice you make every day, and you can only make that choice when you're strong enough that nobody can take it from you. Eyeless nodded slowly. The galaxy still doesn't entirely understand humanity. Good, Zhang said with a slight smile. A little mystery keeps people polite. But we understand each other, and that's what matters. You know we're not monsters. We know you're not tyrants. Everything else we can figure out together.